Henry James, how did it feel to be free when you were released in 2011 after 30 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit?
It felt like, it was a wonderful feeling. And there was a feeling that, I felt that, it was going to prevail, come out one day. Because the opportunity, I kept on fighting, I never gave up hope. On the battlefield, or knowing all the time that I was innocent.
Go back to the early 1980s and tell us what happened. How did you end up in jail?
I ended up in prison, I ended up in jail because, officers sort of put some things in place that put me on a crime. And that all the time I would tell them I wasn't going to crime for number one, I think. They picked me up off my job, telling me that, I raped the lady that I didn't know who they was talking about. And after that, further interrogate me, I later on learned that who the person was. And when they made me remember who the person was, I immediately cooperated with them as to let them know more about my relationship with those people. And my relationship, like you say, was only through the fact that I was only trying to get my car fixed. And I was trying to be sociable toward them. And of course, me being social toward them, I think because I got discharged, I think with officers, because of the accident. All right, and when we got in an accident, I think that officer, interrogate this guy as the one to know who the other guy was that left the accident, because I left the scene of the accident. And I think when I left the scene of the accident, and by him being charged with DWI, and the accident never was mentioned. So I'm thinking that the way this thing rolled out is that with him being charged with DWI and me leaving the scene, so the question come up to officers who the guy was that left the scene. And I think when they learned who left the scene of the accident, and they learned that it was me, I think that then some type of way that the lady husband and the officers didn't know they worked out a deal to see that it was me. A story to come up to saying, well, hey, okay, this Henry James. This a guy, he was with you in the accident. They said, yeah, okay. I'm thinking that from that point, the officers then, convinced him some type of way that if he would go along with the story, this particular story here that what they alleged against me, that if they go along with that, that the accident will go away, that the damage would go, because I know he didn't have insurance. I knew he didn't have enough money to pay for the damage. So for to say he just charged with DWI and the accident never was mentioned, so him and the law officer had to make some kind of deal. And then they had the fact that the officer that was in charge, Officer Gilliard at the time, he knew me. I think that Officer Gilliard worked with the lady's husband, and he coached him in a lot of things, and maybe some promises. As a result of that, it led to me. And when it led to me, I mean, why, if you know who the person is, why wait 2 or 3 days to come pick me up?
Emily Ma.
Sure. What's one of the interesting things about Henry's case is that when the woman was, very horribly raped, there's no question about that, when she initially reported to the police that she had been attacked, she said a man came into her house and attacked her. Now, of course, the interesting thing is that Henry had spent a significant amount of that day watching football with her husband. I think it was a Sunday, Henry, is that right? And they had been driving around together. First they worked on the car, then they went to a bar, I think, and were watching some football. And what Henry is referring to is that Henry and the woman's husband had got into an accident because, frankly, they'd had too much to drink. The husband was driving the car, and they left the scene of the accident. The husband was ultimately put in the drunk tank. And so there was some, the police then went back after the victim initially didn't give them any leads on who it was, or, didn't know who it was. She just said a man had raped her. They went back and, potentially suggested Henry's name, or maybe just showed her a book full of photographs in which Henry's picture was there. It's a little unclear from the paperwork how that happened, but I think Henry is saying that he has some suspicion that because he had been at the scene of the accident, that was somehow used against him.
Right.
And so you go to trial, and there was a blood test that was done. How did they have the blood of the attacker?
I think it was semen. Actually.
Oh, it was the semen.
Yeah, it was from a rape kit, yes.
Right. They told me I agreed to give them that evidence, because they told me if I give them that evidence and nothing would, lead to me, they was going to let me go.
Routinely in rape cases, the police, when they're examining the victim, will take what's called a rape kit, which is any semen that the attacker left, any pubic hairs, anything really that gives some forensic clues as to who could have been the person who committed the crime.
And so this rape kit excluded you. I mean, the test excluded you. The semen test did not match. But this was not raised in court?
No, I didn't know anything about it. Well,
what happened was that there was there is something called a secretor status and a non-secretor status. If you are somebody who is secretor status, if you leave saliva or semen somewhere, your blood type will be seen in that saliva or semen. If you are not, you can only find out your status through the blood. So the initial testing that was done in Henry's case, Henry is a secretor, and they didn't find any secretor activity in the semen that was deposited during the rape. That was probably raised by Henry. It was raised by Henry's trial lawyer at trial, but in the worst possible way, because all he did, the prosecution gave that to the defense. So that wasn't withheld. Henry's disastrous lawyer entered the report into evidence without explaining to the jury what it meant, which is that it was very unlikely that Henry could have left that semen. And so it was in the record, but no one ever got an explanation of what it was, why it was very important in Henry's case. So to some extent then, later on, Henry's case was very, very difficult, because every court looking at it said, well, this report was in the record. It's just that it was in the record and no one ever explained to the jury what it meant. Subsequently, and that, and people may have the explanations about, well, maybe there wasn't enough to detect the right kind of blood secretor status. There were forensic ways that maybe it could have been explained. So reviewing courts just didn't give it any credence until we were able to do the DNA testing that completely excluded him and showed that report had in fact been accurate. It wasn't him. 30 years later really confirm that Henry wasn't the perpetrator of that crime.